Hello, welcome to episode 1. First, it's the Harley-Davidson Sportster, where it's been and where it's going. Then it'll be my bike and me. We'll look at the trials and tribulations of Sportster ownership. After that, it's other people and their bikes. This month it'll be my brother. Lastly, it's readers' letters, where I can answer your questions directly and perhaps share a little bit more about myself. So, I think we're ready for takeoff. As a deeply passionate Harley-Davidson fan, and especially as a Sportster fan, I've been following the Sportster story avidly over the last couple of years. Why wouldn't I? But the whole interweb, and especially the YouTube community, are saying some pretty silly things about Harley-Davidson generally, and the Sportster in particular. So, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then I'll begin. On September the 23rd last year, the French website MotoStation released the news that Harley-Davidson would stop selling the Sportster range in Europe. Harley-Davidson France confirmed at the time that existing European stock of about 1,500 machines were all that remained, and that this stock would not be replenished. The article also pointed out that some Sportster models would still be produced, but principally for the US market. But by January 2021, there were just 3 Sportster models listed on Harley's US website, and there had been 7 or 8 options just 2 years ago. The reasons for the Sportster's demise are well documented, but the 2 most significant relate to the engine and, in Europe at least, to sales. The venerable Sportster engine is known as an Evo or Evolution motor. It first appeared on the larger Harley Tourers and Softails in 1984 and then on Sportsters in 1986. Now, while it's had some hugely significant and beneficial updates since then, this apparently modern Sportster remains a motorcycle that was first designed 4 decades ago. This effectively makes it a technological and transportational fossil. From the 1st of January 1993, European emissions regulations, known as Euro 1, became a legal requirement. Emissions laws have become gradually tighter until Euro 5 for motorbikes came into effect in January this year. Alas, the Sportster's Evo engine was only ever certified to Euro 4. Harley-Davidson seemed to have recognised that updating the Sportster further would go far beyond economic and technological sense. While this came as a surprise to no one, nonetheless, it is still a terribly sad reality. In Europe, the dip in Sportster sales has been surprisingly steep in the last year. Harley-Davidson even went so far as to tell MotoStation that sales of the larger Sport Glide Softail model exceeded Sportster sales. This was a wild surprise to me, because apart from being physically larger all round, the Sport Glide costs fully twice as much as a Sportster 883 Iron, for instance. Other brands, notably Indian with their Scout range, also offer a huge technical and performance advance over the Sportster, so no doubt sales dips have occurred in other markets too. These problems for the Sportster, and others besides, meant that although news of the Sportster's demise spread quickly last September, I was amazed that there was so little fuss made. After all, the Sportster represents one of the oldest continually produced motorcycle models in the world. It was first introduced in 1957 and has continued in production, making it, as far as I'm aware, surpassed in longevity only by Royal Enfield's Bullet, a name which first appeared in the autumn of 1932. All of which does beg the question, why the apparent apathy to the news? Well, back in September, I did receive the news with dismay, but certainly not panic. This is because, like every Sportster fan I imagine, I never believed that Harley's decision equated to the end of the Sportster. No. In fact, Sportster fans' optimistic passions were first ignited by Harley-Davidson when they published a patent in the United States the previous September. This showed a sexy new Milwaukee-8 style engine, but it's air-cooled and higher revving. While RiderPark.com speculated that this hints at a potential replacement to the Milwaukee-8, since that Milwaukee engine itself was only 3 years old at the time, that seemed like nonsense. Rather, as the article goes on to note, it's much more likely that the new engine will form the basis of a brand new Sportster model. How exciting is that? Enthusiastic passions were inflamed even further when, in August 2020, Harley patented a new variable valve timing system, apparently for the same engine. And, as the bastion of British motorcycling Motorcycle News reported, it was aimed to meet Euro 5 emissions targets and was an air-cooled engine. So, new Milwaukee technology, 8 valves, Euro 5 compliance and air cooling. But wait, there's more! Harley-Davidson also told MotorStation that a brand new Sportster will arrive in 2021, although not immediately. But Harley-Davidson does have a replacement lineup planned. Result! So all we have to do is the hardest thing in the world. Wait. But the new Sportster is coming. In May 2018, I was thrilled to be able to buy a gorgeous Harley-Davidson Sportster, specifically a 2016 XL 1200 CA. C for custom and A for the special paint job for the 2015 model year. It's amber whiskey and vivid black. What a combo. It had 3,500 miles on it when I bought it from Cheltenham Harley-Davidson, which is part of the Blade Group. And after 3 years of mostly wonderful ownership, the bike and I have added another 25,000 miles, much curtailed of course because of the dreadful COVID pandemic and the resulting national lockdowns. Here in the UK, it's March 2021 and we're still in our second full lockdown. This means I haven't been able to ride my bike at all since before Christmas. A terrible shame for sure, although, admittedly, something of a first world problem. During those 25,000 miles, several tribulations have arisen with several expensive solutions resulting. For instance, on the initial 90+ minute test ride, the first thoroughly disagreeable feature of note was the dreadful stock seat. It felt really hard and uneven. This observation was followed very quickly by noticing that suspension had little or no travel up and down. It bottomed out over each and every bump front and rear. This is called riding a Sportster. The third disagreeable feature related to the handlebars. The Sportster Customs was supplied with Harley-Davidson drag bars, which are flat and nearly straight. This leads to what, for me, is a horribly hunched over riding position. These 3 items were changed for me by Cheltenham Harley-Davidson. I really couldn't have managed a 3-hour ride home without them. I bought longer rear shocks, 320mm Hagons, and new Drag Specialties Dragster wide handlebars. They offered an extra 3 inches of pullback. The seat was a Mustang Vintage Solo. I also added some pucker Harley-Davidson highway pegs so my feet could reach further forward. I made some short videos at the time and I'll put all the relevant links and part numbers in the description below. Now while all these changes made my Sportster much more rideable, there is still some considerable way to go before it can be described as comfortable. Hopefully there'll be more on this in the future. There have been other problems too, some very curious and others very annoying. All are expensive to solve, and some, according to the dealer, are not really problems at all. Again, I'm hoping we can look at all these things in the future. However, on Monday the 8th of March last week, and even though lockdown is still very much in full force, I ventured out, on my bike no less, and I went into town all on my own, just like a big boy. I was fortunate enough to have my first COVID vaccination in Taunton, and for the whole weekend beforehand, just the thought of riding was almost overwhelmingly exciting. So off I went, brand new 50 quid cross-tour action camera in tow, blowing off the cobwebs and dragging my glorious Sportster out into the chilly morning air. Now things didn't begin well. My bike's always been difficult to start, even with a new battery, but once we get to below freezing temperatures, the original Harley battery, plus 2 other cheap Moto batteries, just don't hold charge, even with a solar panel fitted to the garage roof. The trouble this time was that I got so excited during the week, I started the bike 3 or 4 times in succession, which flattened the battery. I'm not the brightest button in the box. It took me 35 minutes to start the bike. Shockingly, swearing at it doesn't help at all. The problem is that the crocodile clips on the starter cables are quite stubby with very thick insulation. This makes connecting them to the tightly squeezed in battery terminals impossible. So I clip the positive end to the connector lug on the starter motor and the negative end to the gear lever shaft. But even the starter motor lug is tight, so it can be a real trial. But once fired up, we were good to go, so I went. And what a wonderful feeling! How I have missed it! Although still frosty in parts, the sun was very bright for most of the day, but I didn't put my dark visor down until later because I was so enjoying the sunlight on my face. This is what riding a motorcycle is all about for me. Just to be able to throw my leg, quite slowly nowadays, over a wonderful Harley Sportster and to ride into the sunshine, it feels so life-affirming. I've heard and read many riders with mental health problems describe biking as therapy. I wholeheartedly agree. When I'm riding, I feel truly free. I don't have to meet anyone else's demands. I have no expectations to reach, and the only real protocol that I have to adhere to is the highway code. It's just me and a motorcycle. I ride a Harley-Davidson because, at my excruciatingly advanced age, I'm 57, I don't need to rush to the next overtake, nor do I need to run the engine at stupid 1,000 revs. And, literally, I can't sit on a sports bike. It feels like being a compressed spring on the shaft of a nail. No, I ride a cruiser, and it turns out that most cruisers are Harley wannabes to some degree. There are obvious exceptions, of course, like Indians, the Speedmaster, the Rocket, the R18, various others. But you get my point. Anyway, I got to Taunton. Going by the very long way round, to be sure. And I've had my first COVID jab and am now sitting in my office at home. But the feelings of freedom and elation are still there because I can replay the ride in my mind whenever I want. You know, it's been a long, dark wait, but Monday was wonderful. I rode my Sportster once again. How happy does that make me? The continuing COVID pandemic and the subsequent UK lockdown means we can't just go out for a ride nowadays, nor can we just meet up with other riders at the services. This makes it a tad tricky to have a bit called other people on their bikes, but I gave my brother Mike a shout. He's got several interesting bikes in his garage. Admittedly, none are Harley-Davidsons. He's not such a Harley fan, alas, and certainly not a Sportster fan. but it's not for me to work out what's wrong with him here. On the upside, he does love the classic Japanese bikes from the 1970s, as everyone should. Since we can't meet, I asked him for some pictures, and we've been talking about them over the last few weeks. I asked him why he wanted to spend time and money on these old machines, and he said it was a hobby for him. Like many of us, he remembers with great nostalgia the bikes he first came into contact with when he was a kid. And while he may spend £1,000 or £2,000 on a specimen today, he believes the outlay to be an investment, because they're about as cheap as they're ever going to be, and from here on they'll only increase in value as time goes. So it makes sense. His personal ride at the moment is a Kawasaki Z650 from 1982. He spent a great deal of time working on it during lockdown. We don't have any video, I'm afraid, but he did take some snaps while rebuilding the beast. He and his mechanic Jamie stripped the bike down and cleaned up the frame before having it hammerited. I know, what's that about? Wouldn't you have got it powder coated? But it does look good now. Mike's worked extensively on two 650 engines, and he switched them according to his preference. Neither engine number matches the frame, for whatever difference that makes. But after the rebuilding and the powder coating, the engine looks great now. After much work, the bike has been fully reassembled now, and aside from some low rev stuttering, it runs a treat. Apparently, I've not had the pleasure. It certainly looks the job though. But my personal favourite is this 1976 Z650. Although the colour's a bit iffy, it's all original and otherwise quite lovely. And it's no coincidence that back in the very early 1980s, a Kawasaki Z650 C3 was my ride, until I couldn't afford to keep it anymore. Actually, mine was a pale metallic blue, like this US version, which is a KZ650. It's more or less identical to mine, though mine had spoked wheels, a single front disc, and a cheap Piper 4-into-1 exhaust. And it wasn't so shiny either. Mike's Z650 really is lovely though, although it too needs a lot of work. He rode it the other day for about 10 miles, he said, and he wasn't sure if it would make it home. But it did in the end, fortunately. Now Mike owns and runs Kingfisher mini coaches in Reading, and now that the schools are back, he's very busy running children to their education, so he'll not have much time to mess about with motorcycles, unfortunately. Still, when he does, this one's been spending a lot of time under the spanner, and it's near completion. It's a lovely old Kawasaki KZ 400. This is the before picture. There is no after yet. And apart from these lovelies, he's also seen this unusual interpretation of an old Honda CB 404. We call it the trumpet bike. Immediately your eyes are drawn to the bizarre 4x4 trumpet exhausts, but there's also the natty idea of using two old fire extinguishers as a fuel tank. Obviously. Coupled with the very stylish lighting arrangements, it presents a very strange but worryingly fascinating project. Imagine riding it. Well, that's it for this month. It's a little truncated as life, as usual, intervenes. Health issues, for instance, mean that it doesn't matter what you're doing. Sometimes you just have to stop everything and attend an important medical appointment, or 12. Anyway, next time, if there is a next time, I hope to go into much more specifics. It might even be a Harley-Davidson. I'm looking forward to it already. Yes, I know. You're not readers, and these aren't letters. But you know what I mean. This is where we can talk directly, where you, as viewers, can have questions answered. Obviously, I'll not be able to address every question here, but I'll select the most interesting and also try to answer others in the comments sections below. But again, I won't be able to answer them all, but I will do my best. This part also gives me the chance to reveal a little bit about myself too. And as this is our first readers' letters, I'll talk a little bit more about our lives than I usually might, and I'll share my YouTube dreams. But first, I've been asked a couple of questions about my bike. Specifically, Grimble's asked me about the handlebars. They're Chromeworks Stretch Heritage bars. I'll put all the links and the part numbers in the description section below. These bars have been discontinued now, but I got them because they offered the most amount of pullback I could find, which was over 13 inches, but they only rise about 4 inches. They're drilled for internal wiring, and the hole in the centre dictates the correct angle of installation. Actually, I think there's a little more drop available, but on my Sportster, the master brake cylinder fouls on the top of the handlebar swan neck. Any further down, and the mirrors begin to point at the floor because they fit on the same bracket as the master cylinder. Although I'd like them even lower and further back, these bars do work well and I'm quite comfortable with them. Lady B also asked me about the screen and specifically how it fixes to the bike. It's a Harley quick release compact screen with a Harley quick release locking clamp. 4 clamps hold the screen to the forks with a barrel key fitting locking the clamp. The locking clamp is spring loaded and simply pops up when unlocked. Locking it just requires the pin to be pushed back down again. Removal and replacement of the screen is very easy indeed. So, that's enough about you. What about me? My name is Chris. I was born in the home counties of England and spent all my young life in Berkshire, which is the Royal County, don't you know. For nearly 40 years I've lived in Somerset in the southwest of England. I'm married to Anna, my one and only wife, and we've been married since 1994. Recording this in March 2021, I'm 57 years old. I've always loved motorcycles, and I bought my first one before I was 16. It was a brand new Yamaha FS1 DX, a fizzy with a disc brake. To this day, it's the only new vehicle I've ever owned. I think it cost me £430. I loved it. Alas, I never met the pretty girls like the brochure suggested I would. Eventually, though, I ended up with a glorious Kawasaki Z650, like the American KZ I showed earlier. I loved it more than I can easily say, and it broke my heart when I had to sell it. To my stepdad, actually. After a couple of other dreadful bikes, I didn't own another motorcycle for well over 30 years. Then, in 2016, Anna suggested I buy a cheap bike, and I ended up with a Suzuki VX800 for a year. It was a disaster. The bike was okay, but it just didn't work for me. Anna's physical health has been poor for the last dozen years or so, and I've lived under the shadow of significant depression my whole adult life. Anna's suggestion was in response to my own serious decline around that time, as she knew how much I loved riding. Although the VX venture ended in great sadness for me, I actually cried my eyes out. But it did teach me some crucial lessons which I couldn't have learned without owning that bike. First, as a middle-aged man, I can't sit on a roadster-style bike anymore because of various aches and pains. Second, spending £1,000 on a bike just doesn't work unless you're very good with mechanics, and I certainly am not. Third, comfort is more important than anything else. It does smack of hypocrisy, I know, since Sportsters are not that, but they can be made comfortable, though it takes a good while unless you spend a great deal of money very, very quickly. The fourth lesson was that I love long, lazy rides, and I'm not interested in how fast I can go. Rather, I'm interested in how far I can go. A quick blast through the country lanes doesn't do it for me, I much prefer to ride for 300 or 400 miles at a time. The fifth lesson was that, as I mentioned, riding really is good therapy. Although you can't beat good psychological counselling and antidepressants, I've had years worth of both, riding is still hugely beneficial emotionally for me. Since 2016, because of the strategies I use to maintain my mental health, including riding, I'm much happier than I was. This is doubly important because living with depression is a really tough gig for the spouse. But what about this YouTube venture I'm embarking on? What's up with that? Well, the initial aim is to make money. Imagine. But specifically, with 12 to 15,000 riding miles a year, I reckon I'll need about £1,500 every year so I can keep and maintain my Sportster. This will require me to amass 1,000 subscribers because YouTube don't offer revenue until this target is reached. There are many other complicated requirements, like the number of hours watched, the number of links, the likes, the things which affect the click-through rate, the retention rate, and the infamous YouTube algorithm, and many others, all of which are way beyond my understanding at this point. But 1,000 subscribers is the first target. I'm hoping to keep the format of the channel roughly the same. That'll be a lead piece, followed by my bike and me, other people's bikes, and finally readers' letters. The lead piece will generally be about the Harley-Davidson Sportster. In particular, I'm waiting with bated breath for the new Milwaukee-8 Sportster. Surely it's going to be a belter. Harley are saying absolutely nothing, of course, because they've invested huge amounts into the project and, understandably, they want to protect that investment. But the potential Milwaukee-8 Sportster will be my focus. I'll aim to produce a video every month, health allowing, obviously, and I'll publish said video towards the end of each month. That'll probably be the last Saturday, so in April that'll be the 24th for your reference. When and if I ever produce another video depends wholly on how this first one is received. I suppose I'll just have to wait and see. In the meantime, please subscribe to my channel. Link the video to your posts and vlogs and like absolutely everything, including my new Facebook pages. And lastly, for this month, Scrum from Pennsylvania made the observation that, to his American ear, apparently, I sound like Tony Iommi. No one's ever said that to me before. I was surprised. Indeed, I've been thinking about it, and I wonder if anyone else has ever thought that. Tony Iommi is a brummie. No bad thing, but I wasn't aware of speaking like him. In fact, I realise that this has been on my mind for a while. I can hardly stop thinking about it. Crikey, it's almost like I'm feeling paranoid. Cheerio.